Howdy folks, Comic Cowboy, and I have got a brand spanking new video for you right now. And the topic is going to be raw books and some strategies about how to find potentially undergraded books. This is a collecting strategy that not only is applicable to comic books, but it's applicable to almost all collectibles. And it first started, in my opinion, with collectible coins, which I don't get into because I'm not in that market. I look at it because I think it's pretty interesting and there's some neat principles there. But it was this market that dealers in the 90s and the 2000s were buying coins and then buying them essentially ungraded. These coins were still uncirculated, and then having them graded and slabbed and flipping the coin for a tidy profit. Given the high value of coins, you can understand why differences in grade can make a considerable difference. Now, I don't know about you, but right now I turn on the television, and whether it's ESPN and esports and wrestling and Lakers games from the 1990s or wall-to-wall coverage on the networks of coronavirus, I need a break. I need to talk comic books. You're here to hear about comic books and to look at the material. So I thank you for coming in. We've got Harley Quinn here tonight. I got this kick-ass statue. I picked it up from New Force Comics. Badass dude. Check him out on Instagram. Got a great price here on Harley. So let's get into this topic. It's really fascinating because right now, it's really important to find some strategies that work for you in a really ambiguous collecting market. Prices seem to be going up, down, sideways, particularly with keys. Whether that's Golden Age or Silver Age, you may have noticed, I certainly have, that all the way back in March of this year, in January of this year, a lot of the keys in the Silver and Golden Age started to go down in price as you look at GP analysis, which is probably the best tool for looking at prices and graphs and where books are trading. They were going down in value. Now, some of those books have recovered, depends on the book. Some have not. And so in this type of ambiguous market where things may pick up suddenly or they may continue in this state, you can actually apply some principles of collecting strategies that are relevant no matter what's happening in the market, because we're talking about finding books that are selling potentially at a price that is associated with the grade that the book may actually be under. Meaning, I'm talking about finding raw comic books, Golden Age and Silver Age, and how to find books that might be undergraded. Because when they're undergraded, unless you hold on to the book in raw shape, eventually you may get it slabbed. And if you get it slabbed, if the price is going to be higher, certainly it could be because the book went up in value, but it also could be because the grade from CGC or CBCS actually ended up being higher. And how do you look out for these things? What are the strategies? That's what today is about. And also some of the pitfalls. There's some risk to it. Now, let me give you an example of this fantastic copy of Mr. Mystery that I bought. I forgot where I bought it. It may have been eBay. It may have been the CGC boards. I bought it from a reputable seller, and I don't think the seller had an idea that this book had any issues with it. And I did not think the book had any issues either. Looking at the book now, and it's great. Mr. Mystery is fantastic. This is one of the better covers in the line. The gal is aboard a ship, I believe, and coming out of the porthole is this monster, which can ruin anyone's evening. And a few nights ago, I decided to read this book. I don't know why. That's another great thing about having raw comic books, is that some of this material has not been reprinted. So, grab a drink and read these books. The horror stuff from the 50s and also the war books make for a tremendous read. Excuse me, I'm gonna have a sip of wine. I'm usually a beer drinker, but right now I've just been sheltering in place for the most part, and some habits are changing. I don't know about you, but I've gotten really good about cooking, pan searing actually, steak and salmon in my kitchen. So that's been a lot of fun. A lot of new muscle memory happening here during the situation. Excuse me. It's a Pinot. Good stuff, a little dry, bit of grain to it. So I bought this book, and here's a pitfall of buying raw books, even from reputable places, right? You get it off eBay, or maybe you got it off a website. And I was reading the book, and there was a coupon out of one of the pages. Oh man, can you imagine? And I must have spent probably $150 on this book, which would be a good price. And I'm sure like the seller didn't know, you know, you could kind of see there's the coupon out of the book. Oh man. Now, of course, what would happen if you decide to get this book slab and you didn't look through the pages yourself, some dude in Sarasota, Florida at CGC is going to be looking through the pages, and he's going to note coupon out, affects art. It won't get it incomplete. I doubt it with that small of a coupon out. Sometimes they're a little forgiving on this golden age stuff, but I took a real hit on this book. You don't want to see that kind of issue. So like I said, there are some risks you're going to take when you get into buying raw books. It's somewhat of a risky type of strategy to embark upon. Now, this may happen to you. You may get a few examples even from trusted sites. The problem I had with this is if I actually remembered where I bought the damn book, I'm sure I could sell it back, or actually get a refund, I should say, from the seller. Be no problem. I have no idea. I've had this book for a year and a half. I buy a lot of books, so I have no idea where I got this from. Obviously, the seller would trust me. It's not like I would cut out a coupon. Got to be careful for that, right? Because especially with inventory off eBay or in other destinations, these kinds of things can happen. And also, honestly, if you buy raw books and you receive them from eBay or wherever, open up the book and see if everything is as the book was stated in the listing. I didn't do that, which is a mistake. Now, here's a really interesting strategy, and one that I recommend. Heritage has, as you are probably aware, Heritage Auctions, ha.com, has a Sunday auction, and every Sunday they've got a wide array of books. I don't know how they get so many books year-round to auction off. There must be a lot of consigners, and they must have a lot of material. It's a fun sale, and sometimes you can get some really good deals. And they also added a video game. So if you're into vintage video games, there's probably 30 to 40 games that they offer, you know, everything from NES, SNES, N64, and some modern. And also, of course, comic books. Now, in the regular auctions with Heritage, and also with Comic Link and Comic Connect, the big three, right? It is rare in those featured auctions, the marquee options, right, for the sale to have raw books. It's all slab stuff with some exceptions. Now, the Sunday sale with HAW would be the exception. That's not one of their featured auctions. That's where you can get raw books. As you can see here, this Adventures into Darkness, Lot 18017. This is a fantastic book. I do not like how Heritage put this label on the Mylar. Can you see that? They do this, and it seems like a good idea until you realize it's a pain in the ass to take this off, and it actually kind of damages the sleeve, right? So I want to see the book. I actually get these books. I should send them some feedback. I know those guys. I'm sure this is here for their purposes, right? It's got a barcode. It makes them easier for those folks to probably organize the lots. However, it's not great for the collector. Nevertheless, heritage is really interesting when you're deciding to collect and acquire raw books, because I think, and you know, there's lots of different opinions here. People have different views on this topic. I personally feel that heritage is dealing with large volumes of books, right? Most of the slab material is the higher price point. Usually with the raw books, unless it's really special, they tend to put them into lots. And I think, and I could be wrong, that they grade on the conservative side, whereas on eBay, it is the opposite. The seller is a little bit more enthusiastic about the price. Why is that? Well, think about it. If you're heritage and you're a massive auction house, you don't want to have a bad reputation for overgrading comic books, especially when it's a small line item, this type of book. This isn't their bread and butter. And also, they're dealing with so much inventory. Do you think their graders have time to sit down with hundreds and hundreds of books that are worth $100 to $200 and get those things accurately graded? I would think in those cases, they are going to be a little bit more conservative, and that has been what I have discovered, hence the deals, right? Because you can find stuff that they conservatively grade. How conservative? Hard to say. Half a point, maybe a full point, you never know. Sometimes it's spot on, they're pretty good. They are not taking the same time to grade this material that CGC is, right? That is setting the bar of the de facto grade that the material should be. So this is a really interesting strategy to deploy because you can do it at almost any given time. It's not really subject to where the market is going, because if you buy a book at 5.0 prices and you get it slabbed and it's a 6.0 or a 6.5, you've done quite well. Now, I don't flip books, so that's not the strategy or my recommendation. However, you may sell them at a later time. You may get the book pressed to remove non-color breaking defects and get a better grade. Now, when you're talking about raw books, there are certain categories of books in the golden and the silver age that give you the most amount of upside when you're dealing with this type of scenario. Again, you know, hearkening back to what happened in the coin trade, where dealers that I know really spend a lot of time becoming experts on condition, complete experts on condition, right? So, you know, I think there is an art to be at a comic show, which God knows when there'll be those again, right? But you may remember, you're at a comic show, it's busy, you're going through the long box, you're looking at a lot of stuff, and the books are priced. It's hard in that environment when it's crowded, you feel like you're in a bit of a rush to really get a sense of what the grade of the book is. You've got to take it out, you've got to look through it. If you develop an eye for this stuff, you can get tremendous amounts of upside. It's a great strategy. With pre-code horror, you see a lot. This Astonishing is actually in excellent condition, as you can just see from afar here, issue number 24. This looks higher grade. That actually to me looks like 7.0. I mean, this actually may even get to like 7.5 with the pressing. It's a great copy. This material, when it's slabbed, goes for a pretty penny, which isn't to say you can just go to eBay and log through all the listings and find undergraded books. As I said, on eBay, it's pretty tricky. they tend to be, I think, more enthusiastic. I'm not saying they're overgrading, but if it tilted either direction, I think it would tilt towards overgraded. Oftentimes on eBay, the seller doesn't give you a grade if it's raw. They'll just give you information about the books, typically listing the defects. And you're left to make a pretty tough call on the condition based on some pictures, and people are applying filters. Who's to say they're not? Whether that's Instagram or eBay, it is really easy to take a picture with your cell phone and just increase the brightness, adjust the contrast, and the book will present better. Be careful of that, because it's really hard to discern that. Now, I think with Heritage and the larger sites, I do not believe that they have that practice, though you never know. You never know. Nothing better than having the book in hand. These days, real hard to do. Here's an interesting strategy, and it is related to war books. War books, when I mean Golden Age war books, whether that's pre-code material from the late 40s through the early to sort of mid 1950s, you get the code stuff. It's also pretty rare. This is an Atlas book here. These are hard to find when they're slabbed in higher grade. In higher grade in war, friends, it's like 6.0 is almost considered higher grade. If you have like some of these books, some of these Atlas war books, like in 7.0, in 7.5, possibly highest graded or top 3 graded. I mean, it's remarkable. So I like to look on the eBay listings and find, because these books sell pretty cheap and they're fantastic, and they have their really devoted collectors. This stuff, when you find the right audience for it, will pay a good price for this material. So if you've got the patience to sift through all those listings on eBay, take your time. I mean, that's the thing. Don't rush. Really look at the grade, because you may find in some examples, the seller is dealing with a lot of inventory, so they rushed to grade their book in the listing. You may also, as I mentioned before, go to Heritage and look at the Sunday auctions. When you look at all this raw book, take a look to see if you agree with the grade. Now, Heritage, excuse me, grades it not by the numbers when it's raw, but like very good, VG minus, fine, fine plus, near mint, etc. So, you know, if you're not familiar with that, just look at the table online or on CGC's website or Overstreet, because honestly, when you've been collecting for a while, as I'm sure you have been, when someone says the book's a 6.0, I kind of have an idea what that's like. If they say it's very fine, I go, what the hell is very fine? Like, is that a 5.0 or a 7.5? I just don't think that way. I think in the numbers. I think a lot of us do. Here's a great example. I bought this from Heritage. They called it good to very good, right? And I paid $552 for this book. I actually think this will end up getting a better grade than that. It may get into potentially a 4.5, you know? It certainly could. It's got a little of distress increasing along the spine. If anything, I would say it might be a little bit of a conservative grade. And again, key principles when deploying this strategy is patience. If you've got a chance, really look at those scans, really look at those pictures. I know you don't have a chance to have the book in hand, and look at how they are estimating the grade. Is it the Sunday auction with Heritage? That's kind of a good place to mine for gold, in my opinion. I've just heard a lot of examples of that. And also with these sort of inexpensive books, because when the books are less expensive, typically the seller isn't spending as much time on the description. So there's also a potential for folly there, because the grade could be way off. But if you look at it, and you think that the book is actually in better condition, and the seller, all they've done is given you a description, and the price is reflecting something that would be indicative of a book, if slabbed, of something less expensive, there's a really nice opportunity for you. Now, with modern books, you know, I don't really cover this category. I just think this Batman cover is particularly awesome. I don't need this book slab, but I would say if you're into modern and you collect, I believe slabbed is the only way to go, because who can tell? Excuse me. I need to have a sip here. A little parched. I got a studio here, meaning I don't just turn on the camera, folks. I got lights in here. It gets a little hot, so please do subscribe to the videos. It's the best endorsement I can possibly get, because I'm setting up the lights, I'm setting up the camera, I'm getting the books, and I'm bringing you the material live. And as I said sort of in my early videos, books on hand, that's the thing. Skin in the game. I'm always showing books that relate to the topic. Here's a Police Comics number 22. With this kind of material, it's a low price point. And as I said before, books that have a lower price point typically are not subject to as much scrutiny around the grade. The seller may, in some cases, have no description. They're relying on you to determine the grade. It's only really on Heritage that every book, they have a description and they've got a potential grade. This is when the stakes get a little bit higher. Now, it's fine when you're dealing with raw books and you're buying them and it's less than $100 or $100 to $150. When you get into Golden Age books that are in the $400 to $500 range, honestly, my first thing that I think, literally the first thing that comes to mind when I see an expensive book raw on, I'd say, eBay, what do you think that is? Probably the same thing you're thinking right now. Is the book restored? That is the number one thing. And of course, you don't have the book in hand. You're buying it raw. The seller may say something like, to the best of my knowledge, this book is not restored. What else can they say? You know, they are not experts. You know, it's not as simple as taking the book under a black light, right? It's not as easy as you think to determine restoration if it's not a visible defect. Even sometimes tape isn't considered restoration. So I honestly think to myself, I assume it's restored. The only way you could really not get your ass handed to you is to assume the book's restored. But nevertheless, depending on where you buy the book, if you buy it off the CGC boards, trust the seller, look at their kudos. Some of those sellers have been on the boards for years, and if they say the book's not restored, I trust that seller. I've been buying stuff off the CGC boards for, this isn't a plug, mind you, because I don't always get the best deal there, but I buy from trusted sellers on the CGC boards. It's a good place to pick up stuff. Sometimes I like the wild, wild west of eBay, because if you know what you're doing, you can find some deals. This Pinot's serving me well. So I'm not saying do not buy expensive Golden Age books because you're, you know, fearful that it's restored. Just know that going in. I think it's better to concentrate on the books that are $100 to $300 than taking a shot on this Bats, which is in the several hundreds of dollars at least, and it could be restored. I think I got it off the CGC boards, but I'm bidding on a lot right now of a book that I'd really like on eBay, and it's gonna cost me quite a bit because the book's really tough to come by, and it could be restored. And you know what sucks about that? could be a long time before you get that book back. It's not like you're gonna find out next Sunday after you bought the book if it's got restoration. You're gonna take the book in-house. You may put it away into your collection for a period of time. Who knows, 6 months, a year later, you may say, hey, I'm gonna take 5 or 6 books, this is one of them, send it off to CGC, it comes back and it's restored. By then, it is too late, that ship has sailed. Even if you bought the book from eBay and you receive it and you send it off to the lads in CGC and it comes back restored, guess what? That might not be refundable. You know, this is sort of the risk one takes when buying raw books. I'll give you an example here. This Alley-Oop book is restored. How do I know that? It was in a restored holder and I took it out. Now, I would never sell it as an unrestored book. It's unethical. I took the book out because when I sent it in and it came back restored, I was like, oh man, what's the point? You know, this book isn't very expensive, period. And if it's restored, it's worth very little, but it's a great book. So I cracked it back out of the slab. What a waste of time and money. These things can happen to you. If you look at this copy of Alley-Oop here, and if you were to find this in a long box or in any other type of site and it did not indicate that the copy had restoration, I guarantee it can't be found here. It's color touch and it's really, really subtle. Some of the color touch is really bad and you could actually see it when you hold it up at different angles to the light. Some of it's hard to determine. This kind of material here, when you're getting to late 60s Silver Age non-key material, I do like to try to find this stuff raw, period. I don't want to buy these books slabbed. If I do buy something like this slabbed, I want to see it like in a 9.6 or 9.8 because then it actually has quite a nice value to it. I would judge looking at this Submariner 9, which these are great. These are so underappreciated. It's unbelievable how inexpensive the Submariner line is and how great it is. This guy very well may appear as a villain in the next Black Panther film. Namor, as you may know, the rights to this character have been fought over between Marvel and Universal for years. So he hasn't been on the screen. I think he's awesome. He's kind of like an anti-villain. And his wife's great too, Namora. She's fantastic. So this book I would say is probably in a 8.5, judging by some of the color breaking creases on the spine. And again, if you're collecting this stuff, you're really spending, you know, $10 to $30 depending on the book. That kind of book I really like to purchase when I'm able to hold it and see it. That's a tough one to pick off eBay. And of course, coverless. Yeah, so coverless books, basically they do have a grade and it's usually no better than 0.5. I think CBCS actually does different decimal points. CGC has the 0.5 grade, incomplete, coverless. And this is blue. This is kind of funny because this is Blue Beetle. Actually, no, this is actually, I believe, Mystery Men Comics #7, which is the first cover appearance of the Blue Beetle. And here it is missing the cover. It's kind of funny. I don't buy coverless books. I think they're kind of fun. Here's a great book. This is Captain Marvel Adventures, issue number 26. It's the first appearance of the Shazam villain, Mr. Mind. It's the little worm. So if you saw at the end of the film, when Shazam is in that jail cell, the little worm appears, I think, after the credits. So he's probably going to be the villain in the next film. That's in production. That is on the DC slate. And he appears in this issue, And I started buying copies of it because there's not a lot of keys in the Captain Marvel Adventures line. And once again, our friends at Heritage with the ridiculous label here on the Mylar, which sucks because you can't readily pull it off. And they, assigned a grade to it. This book really looks like it probably could pull off close to a 4.5 or a 5.0, and you could do really well. Again, Heritage is great to mine for raw books. Each book that those folks, and this is not a plug, I do not work for those guys in Dallas, Heritage Auctions, but they're selling a lot of stuff, friends, every Sunday. A lot of material. And again, this raw stuff sometimes gets lumped together. And they got high-res scans, which is great. Not all the sites do that, right? I think Comic Connect's trying to figure out their new website. It's got a magnifying glass, which doesn't even enhance the image. I don't know what's going on with those guys. Heritage has got a really good website. You can click and really expand the image. Take your time and look at the stuff. And also, not only with relation to Golden Age stuff, you've also got to be careful buying what I would consider, I guess this is a key. This is the first appearance of Atuma, Fantastic Four issue 33, a book that I think it has tremendous amount of upside. What did I pay for? $150. Why? Because if Namor goes to the screen and there's a film with Submariner, this is the sort of bad guy. And Atuma, although this isn't a Submariner book, his first appearance is in this FF. This book isn't always found slabbed. You can find raw copies of it, but it's also a book that is known. So the seller, depending on the site, is likely going to talk about probably the best grade that book can potentially be found in. So you got to be careful there. In winding down here, I would say inexpensive material like this Blue Beetle 1 from 1964, first silver appearance of the Blue Beetle. This is a very inexpensive book. It only when you get up to grades of like 9.0, 9.2, this book goes all the way up to a 9.8 if you can believe it. There's a 9.8 copy of this book. There's 2 in 9.6, 1 in 9.8. It's relatively common. But also Avengers 4, first Silver Age appearance of Cap, there's many more copies of that book. And it's a lot more valuable because it's Cap. Now, the Blue Beetle, if he gets his film, this will be actually a coveted book. You can find this book easily at a good price, undergraded, because it's so cheap. Copies are $20 to $30 for this lower grade stuff. When a book's selling for $20 to $30, for the most part, if it's a dealer with a lot of inventory, they're not spending a lot of time scrutinizing that book.